This is the Crowdcrux Crowdfunding Podcast with Sal Briggman, where we cover everything you need to know to launch a successful crowdfunding campaign. We speak with proven entrepreneurs who've raised money from the crowd and want to teach you how to do the same. Stay tuned because we're about to reveal how to launch your dream project. With your host, Sal Briggman.
Before we get started with this podcast episode, I want to take a second to introduce you to my friends at Fulfillrite. If you need help shipping out your Kickstarter or Indiegogo perks or rewards, Fulfillrite is the absolute best company for you. I've been working with them for a while and I can vouch for their services. They make it dead simple and take all of the headache out of shipping out all of those boxes, all of those orders to your backers and your customers. If you want to check them out, go to fulfillrite.com at fulfillrite.com. What up, crowdfunders? Welcome back to the Crowdfunding Demystified podcast. My name is Salvador Briggman. Thank you for tuning in here today. And on this episode, we're going to be focused exclusively on equity crowdfunding. But I have to underscore here that this show is for everyone. It's for you if you are an entrepreneur trying to raise money for a gadget or a gizmo. It's also for you if you're more of a creative type. You're someone in the audience who's trying to use crowdfunding or Kickstarter or Indiegogo to raise money for a board game, to raise money to publish a book, to raise money to put on a play, or to raise money for the production of a film. There are so many different ways nowadays that you can use crowdfunding, and there are many different categories on Kickstarter. If you're in the creative category, or if you're interested more so on Indiegogo or Kickstarter or even nonprofit fundraising, you can go into the archives of this podcast and pick out the episodes that resonate with you, the ones that really jump out to you, and you can listen to those. I think that's how to use this podcast and this archive of knowledge most effectively. Today, I want to focus exclusively on equity crowdfunding. I brought on an expert who's not only a Forbes contributor, but she's also a researcher. She also has helped many small business owners over the years. She's talked a lot about equity crowdfunding, but she's also talked about female entrepreneurship, women entrepreneurs and women business owners. If you're in the audience right now and you are a female entrepreneur, you're a girl boss hashtag, I think you're going to like this episode because it really speaks to you. It speaks to the fact that not only male entrepreneurs, but also women entrepreneurs can get funding via equity crowdfunding and via some of the other websites we'll be discussing. In particular, Geri shares a website, a resource that you can use to raise upwards of $10,000 in an interest-free loan. This means you don't have to pay back that money, and you can do it in literally a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. You can have $10,000 in your hands in a span of 30 days and use that to grow your business. So she's going to share a website with you that you can do that, and literally anyone out there can use that. There are more and more entrepreneurs in New York City, female entrepreneurs that are using this very same website. And I know because I was on a panel with Geri and we were all talking about crowdfunding, women entrepreneurship, etc. For me, this journey started when I first interned at Springboard Enterprises. And for those of you who don't know, it's basically an accelerator nonprofit program to help people, specifically women, really connect with capital in a way that's not available right now. So many women entrepreneurs, so many females in the audience, you go out there, you try to raise money, and so many of the investors are men. They don't understand your entrepreneurial idea. They don't understand the marketplace as well. So they're less likely to invest in you. So today's episode is going to cater more to that, but it's also going to be very comprehensive in terms of equity crowdfunding, what you should know, which websites you should be on the lookout for, and the differences between the various types of equity crowdfunding. I think you're going to like this episode a lot. And finally, if you haven't yet, take a second to subscribe to this podcast. If you're interested in learning more about equity crowdfunding, I have a free guide for you, which you can check out at crowdcrux.com/equity crowdfunding. That is crowdcrux.com/equity wdcrux.com/equity crowdfunding. That is a free guide that will introduce you to the different concepts and terminology and things you want to know going forward. Geri, I am so excited to have you on this podcast. We did an awesome panel recently helping women entrepreneurs in New York City. I'm really excited to talk about everything you know now about equity crowdfunding. You've launched your own campaign. You're a contributor to Forbes. There's so much information we can get into. Welcome to the show.
Oh, delighted to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
So I know that I did a little bit of an intro there. Maybe you could fill in some gaps there. Can you tell the listeners a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Terrific. So my company is Ventureneer, which is VentureNeer.com. And I help large companies reach small businesses through thought leadership. So that could be research, that could be content, or it could actually be training. So my clients include American Express, Dell, the City of New York, QuickBooks, and I've done everything from the state of women-owned businesses to research on equity crowdfunding specifically for women. And I know that that's the hot topic that we're going to be speaking about, as well as just writing a lot of content about crowdfunding.
What did get you interested in crowdfunding?
So I've been involved in the women's space, women's entrepreneurship space since the mid to late 90s. And one of the things that women don't do is raise capital. So they raise about half the amount of capital. And the key ingredient, or one of the important ingredients in growing your company, is capital.
Very true.
Yeah. So I've been doing a lot of research about the reasons why, and it's twofold. In some cases, it's that women aren't dreaming big enough, but in other cases, it is that there really is discrimination out there, and in different types of financing, there are definitely favor male entrepreneurs.
Yeah, very true. Honestly, this is something that I have to be transparent here that I did not know about all of the time. It was only once I started to actually do an internship at Springboard Enterprises that I was actually exposed to that kind of material, where I was learning about how women entrepreneurs are not funded in the same way that male entrepreneurs are. And you can sort of look into, venture capitalists and angel investors. You can only see a certain portion of business ideas. Women just come up with different ideas, and they have different ways of going about building their company. So for me, that was just a really eye-opening experience.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And, I know the folks at Springboard pretty well. And I think, I'll speak for Amy right now, Amy Millman, in the fact that women will ask for probably half as much as what they need, and men probably twice as much as what they need. So, that's
why
part
is that? That's crazy.
So some of it can be around confidence, and I think training can help prepare women so that they're asking for what they really need. And I think it's also that women are more pragmatic and realistic in their projections. So to some degree, really are asking for what they need as opposed to more than what they need.
Mm-hmm. And I think we all just naturally will underestimate the amount of capital we need to build out a company, because there are so many different variables and factors. So by even erring on a little bit more, I think that's going to help companies in the long run. So for you, having spoken with so many of these female entrepreneurs, you have a really unique opportunity right now in that the audience here is all interested in raising money with crowdfunding. They're all entrepreneurs. They're all looking to do this. Do you have any advice for people that are looking to actually tap into crowdfunding? What do you say to them, for a beginner out there who is looking to use this new financial tool?
It really depends where you are in your journey, but I think one of the things is to use sort of easier forms of crowdfunding to start you off. So last week I interviewed Lisa Curtis of Cooley Cooley. She started with a rewards-based crowdfunding campaign on Indiegogo and raised $53,000. moved into Kiva, which normally I would say is the lighter version of Kiva. So normally if I were recommending to women where to start, it would be with Kiva. You can raise up to $10,000 in an interest-free loan. And it's pretty easy. You don't have to ask for a lot of money. You can ask for as little as $25 or as much as you need to ask for. But you only have to raise money from a small number of people because the Kiva community is going to come behind you. And then frequently there'll be institutional money matching what you're doing.
Interesting. So I want to get into in a little bit the equity crowdfunding, all that kind of stuff. But for now, let's dive more into Kiva because I actually haven't talked very much about that on this podcast. So how does Kiva work? You know, if I'm a woman entrepreneur or an entrepreneur in general and I want to raise money, how does Kiva work?
So I love Kiva. I teach entrepreneurship here in New York City and frequently have them on panels with me. And one of the things that I like about it is that you don't need a lot of money. You don't need to have a really big network. If you've asked people in your network to donate to a charity, that translates very easily into doing a Kiva raise. So the first time I contributed to a campaign, it was a friend who sent out an email to her friends. She regularly raised charitable money from them and said, you know that I have a company. Here's what the reasons why I'm raising money for it, and all I'm asking for is $25. And she raised $25 from 23 different friends, so not a huge amount of money. But then the Kiva community came in behind her, and then there was an institutional backer who I think it was actually a 2-for-1. So within less than 10 days, she raised $10,000.
She raised $10,000 in 10 days on Kiva.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And again, it's crowdfunding light. So it's really, really easy.
I love
and I'll
that.
and I'll also give another plug for New York City. So I'm a WeNYC mentor here in New York City, and they just did a big strategic alliance with Kiva, and they will actually put in your first $1,000. They'll put in 10% or your first $1,000 into your campaign.
Very cool. Very cool. So this is sort of like, is this, if I give money to one of these Kiva campaigns, is this a loan that I'm giving my friend or is this just like a donation?
Yes, that's a really good question. So there are different versions of that theme. So there are other companies out there where it's actually a true donation. In Kiva, it's actually an interest-free loan, so you're going to get your money back. So once a month, I get like $1 something back.
Whoa, that's cool.
Yeah, it's very cool. It's very automatic. And I think right now I have 3 different entrepreneurs that, I've backed. So I get money back into my Kiva account, and then actually I probably have invested in more because I reinvest that money into other
that is really
people.
Neat.
Yeah.
It's a very it's an ecosystem almost, because if you're going on Kiva, you have access, as you said, to institutional investors or backers. You have the actual Kiva community, and then you have your friends and family. And rather than just asking for money, you're actually going to be paying them back. And then they can use that same money that you paid back to go out there and support other entrepreneurs.
Exactly. So it's again, it's one of my favorite forms. It's very easy. So if you have fear of asking for money, here you're really not asking for. It's not a big ask.
Yeah.
So you don't have to be as fearful.
Now myself, I actually don't know a tremendous amount about Kiva, and I sort of associate it with microfinance, which is like, financing maybe like developing countries or something like that. Is there any stipulation for a female entrepreneur? Like, is it that you have, I don't know, a certain credit score, or you can't go above like this amount of revenue for your company? Is there any criteria for raising money on Kiva?
So that's the beauty of Kiva, is there is no criteria. So it really started in the developing world. So the original idea was lending far less money, maybe $25 to a female entrepreneur in a developing country. And it was the donors in the United States that went back to Kiva and said, you know what, we love donating to people in developing countries, but we'd also like to lend to entrepreneurs here in the United States. Mm-hmm. So when they first did it, and I don't remember the year that they started here in the United States, but it was a $5,000 loan. Then they upped it to $10,000, and I think they're piloting even higher levels of funding. So outside of the United States, it's going to be smaller amounts of money. In the United States, it's larger amounts of money.
Is this a newer thing?
So I think it's been around, I can't quite remember the year that it started, but, I'm going to say it was like Oprah's favorite thing in maybe 2012. Bill Clinton backed it and talked about it, or the Clinton Foundation talked about it as one of its favorite things. Mm-hmm. So it's been around for a long time, and it has a lot of, a lot of people think very highly of it.
Yeah. I think that with crowdfunding in general, it's still something that is disseminating into the mainstream. I regularly will attend networking events and parties, and people still don't know what crowdfunding is or what Kickstarter is. And I guess the same can be said of Kiva, but the fact that you can raise $10,000, up to $10,000 from your friends, from family, from the Kiva community, and it's an interest-free loan, that's just like a no-brainer to me as an easy way to get started with crowdfunding. So thank you for that recommendation. Do you have any other, have you run a rewards-based campaign yourself on like Indiegogo or Kickstarter or any of these other ones?
Yeah, so that's funny that you asked me. I did run a rewards-based crowdfunding campaign on Plum Alley, which no longer does rewards-based crowdfunding. It's morphed into an offline syndicate to help raise money for women entrepreneurs. So it's now raising money from accredited investors for women-led companies. But I did one 2 or 3 years ago because I was researching equity crowdfunding. So the Jobs Act came out and Title II launched, which is the crowdfunding effort that's aimed at accredited investors. I thought it was going to take off among women. And I knew a company, and actually the company was a Springboard graduate, and I met her at a Springboard event, and I asked Crowdnetic Luan Cox if her company, which was tracking crowdfunding investments, could track women-led companies pitching for crowdfunding.
So you were raising money for research. Is that right?
Yeah. So what happened was, even before I raised money for research, I was very excited about the Jobs Act. And the first part of the Jobs Act that came out was Title II, which is the initiative that's aimed at accredited investors. So you can now go, this as well as me, you can go on crowdfunding platforms and raise money from people you don't know.
It was hard. You can't do that otherwise. It was illegal to a certain degree. And also just, now it's such easier concept. I do want to get into that in just a little bit, but I just have the question here. So what was your one takeaway here from doing your own rewards-based campaign for research?
It's really hard. So
that's such an interview question. Yeah.
It takes a lot of work. So, the good news is doing rewards-based crowdfunding has many, many benefits. And I'm sure you've spoken, about that it's debt and equity-free money. It provides insight into your marketplace. You get feedback from your early adapters. It provides validation to future funders, and it's a marketing tool. So that's the really positive things about rewards-based crowdfunding. The sort of bad news is, as I said, it's really, really hard work. It takes persistence, and it sometimes takes a little money too. So you may decide that you want a fancier video, and your friends, just can't help you produce that, or you want to do Facebook ads. So those are the kinds of things that could add up in terms of doing that campaign. There can be unanticipated costs. So you think you're going to be successful at it, and then you decide that you're going to, when you hit the wall, that you need to bring in marketing vehicles that you didn't include in.
Yeah. We've talked about that a lot, definitely in other episodes, where you really need to be prepared. You need to know going in how you're going to get attention. It's a tremendous opportunity, but at the same time, there are those costs that are associated with it. In your research, have you noticed anything different with female entrepreneurs when they approach crowdfunding, or even the work that we've done, at the panel? Did you learn anything about how women entrepreneurs approach crowdfunding?
So this isn't my research. So there's a lot of academic research and now research that came out from.
I'm speaking to the crowdfunders in the audience who have already launched a Kickstarter campaign, or have actually even successfully run a campaign. And the reason is, I think you will understand this pain point most. And that is, when you finally do raise money on Kickstarter or Indiegogo, the hardest part is not collecting the cash. The hardest part is shipping out all of those perks and rewards to your backers. It is a nightmare, my friends. It's a lot of spreadsheets, it's a lot of headache, and it's a lot of stress. That's why I recommend BackerKit. If you have not heard of BackerKit, they help you collect surveys, they help you collect data, and the entire fulfillment process is just so much easier and so many less spreadsheets when you use their software. You can check them out at backerkit.com and use CrowdCrux for a special discount.
Price Waterhouse Cooper, just showing that crowdfunding or rewards-based crowdfunding is the one financing option that women outperform men. And they outperform men for two reasons. And I don't think this is going to surprise you, is that women are really good marketers. They know how to pull at the heartstrings. And the second reason is that the community of women come around them. So other women will support you when you're doing a rewards-based crowdfunding campaign.
I think that's very well said. Number one, just sort of restating here that in my own experience, emotions, empathy, putting yourself in someone else's shoes to really convey good marketing, that's not something that comes naturally to a man, in my opinion, but it does very well to a woman. So I can totally see that. And I also just think it shows if women are outperforming men with crowdfunding, then there's a ton of opportunity for any woman entrepreneur in the audience to go out there and raise money with this vehicle. And the second being, when it comes to crowdfunding and doing these different campaigns, you really do need a crowd, and to have a base of supporters, people who are rallying around you and supporting you, that just puts you head and shoulders above everyone else. So and I can also totally see that. It's good that it's now supported by research. Going into a bit of your own research, so you produced this report here that says how women and men benefit from equity crowdfunding. I want to get into some of the things that you've learned producing this, some of the findings about equity crowdfunding, and really how people can use it. What are the platforms people should be paying attention to? How are they going to go about this? I guess we can get started here by just asking you, what have you learned about equity crowdfunding that you can share with the audience?
So I love this answer. It depends. So sometimes rules are made to be broken, and I'll explain what I mean by that in a moment. But many of the crowdfunding platforms specialize in different areas or different industries. So Circle Up, for example, specializes in more of the consumer industries. AngelList more in technology. So you may want to choose a platform that would be a good fit for your particular industry. So again, last week I interviewed Lisa Curtis of Cooley Cooley. She used Ag Funder because she was food and beverages, and a lot of the investors that she would be raising money on sort of hang out or looking for opportunities on that particular crowdfunding platform.
Okay. So rather than like with rewards-based crowdfunding, you might say like Kickstarter or Indiegogo. With this, it seems like it's more niching down to the individual platforms depending on what type of company you are. Do you have any thoughts on like Seed Invest or WeFunder or these other platforms?
Yeah, so I think they're all good, and you really need to do your homework because some of the platforms are going to charge you because they are investment houses, so they can actually help you really find your investors. So Seed Invest would be an example that might have higher fees than some of the others, but for that they're providing a service and really they're finding you the investors, versus other crowdfunding platforms. And I think Crowdfunder might fall in this category. You really do the work. So you're bringing your investors onto the platform, and they're going to charge you less. So, for example, Cooley knew that she was mostly raising from her own network. So she could go with a platform that might have lower fees than somebody who might be raising money on another platform. So you really need to know what you want and what you're willing to pay for. So, I've interviewed, and this had nothing to do with equity crowdfunding, but I interviewed Stephanie Newhouse several years ago. Here is a very sophisticated CEO who was raising money and had raised money for many different companies and decided to use an investment banker as the intermediary because she wanted it to happen quickly and she didn't want to spend a lot of her own time doing it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay, so there are different ways to go about it, and they all have different benefits and costs, I guess, based on, number one, if you want to do the work, you want someone else to do it, how big your crowd is, et cetera. I think one difference here, though, is the difference between something like a Title III raise, where anyone out there can raise money, can invest in the actual company, and also a Regulation A+ raise. I'm sort of seeing the divide there. What do you think?
So there are three buckets of investment crowdfunding. So that first bucket is Title II, which is the Accredited Angel Investor, and that was the one that first came out and the one that my research was about. Then came Title IV, which is Regulation A+, and that allows you to raise money from both accredited angel investors as well as mainstream investors. And there's two different ways of doing it. One, I think, has a cap of 20 million, and then the other has a cap of 50 million. I do have one entrepreneur who is raising money using Regulation A. I wrote the article about a month and a half ago and have not checked in with her. But I know, like, when she did her accredited angel investor raise, she raised $9 million. And then she wanted to give the opportunity to mainstream investors. And this is Kat Berman of C-Note. And she's sort of crossing crowdfunding with CDFIs. So women and millennials tend to be oversavers. And if you put your money in a savings account, you're actually losing money because you're not getting
inflation.
Good interest. If you invest in a CDFI, which is pretty liquid, it's not as liquid as the savings account, you can get up to 40 times the return on your investment as a savings account. And, initially, as I said, she was raising from accredited investors, but now she's doing a Regulation round.
One thing I want to do here is, we're throwing around a lot of financial terms. So there's as you said, the three buckets. So we have to get also the Title III. So the Title II, Regulation A+. So there are a lot of different, words we're throwing around here. I think one of them is accredited investors. So someone trying to raise money, and we throw around that word accredited investors. What does that mean exactly? What is someone who is an accredited investor?
So it's really somebody who's wealthy. So years and years ago, after the Great Depression, the SEC was formed, and they made a ruling that they were concerned about some companies fleecing unsuspecting or unsophisticated investors. So remember, this would have been back in the 1930s.
There's not a lot of knowledge as well. out there.
Yeah, there wasn't a lot of knowledge. Now I think a lot of more people, whether they have money or don't have money, have become pretty sophisticated investors. So the term accredited investors was supposed to be synonymous with being more savvy, and it's somebody who can afford to lose their money.
Okay.
So that's why it's a wealthy person. It's somebody who's earning at least $200,000 or has assets aside from their house of $1 million.
Okay, so basically, the way that you're going with, the Title II raise or the regulation, or I guess if you're doing an angel investment round, it would have to be with people that are ultra wealthy, that have lots of money, have a big net worth, or have a significant income. And that's a small number of people in the United States. You'd have to find these people, you'd have to court them, you'd have to persuade them. I had to interrupt this podcast episode because I want to introduce you to my friends at The Gadget Flow. Their product discovery platform reaches 22 million people per month. They've helped more than 5,000 crowdfunding campaigns thus far, and they have a social media following of more than 700,000 followers. If you want to gain access to their marketplace and list your own product, you can go to thegadgetflow.com/submit and list your project today. Of the value of investing in your company. So what's different now? What's different? What is unlocked with a Title III raise or Regulation A+?
So you can go to Main Street Investors and raise money. So a Title III raise, which we haven't got into, which is also called Reg CF or Regulation Crowdfunding, allows you to raise up to $1 million from Main Street or Average Joe, Average Jane Americans. And there's some restrictions on that. I forget what the percentage is, but it's either X percentage of what you make, or maybe it's up to $2,000. I should have looked that up before we got on the interview. But there are limits or caps to protect people who may not be able to afford to lose a lot of money.
Okay. So the big difference here being that with a Title III raise or a Regulation A+, anyone out there, we call them retail investors, ordinary investors, who is not a really wealthy person can invest in your company. So that's the entire planet, the planet Earth, I guess. Obviously it's going to vary based on the territory, but this is a wider pool of investors that you can gain access to when you do a Title III raise, Regulation CF, or Regulation A+. It's a really big game changer, I think.
Yeah, so I totally agree with you, and it's why, again, I've been so excited about crowdfunding, and it hasn't translated yet, which I think you also mentioned earlier on in our conversation. So we haven't reached the point where big numbers of entrepreneurs are raising money through any form of crowdfunding, whether it's rewards or investment, and certainly rewards-based crowdfunding has been around longer, but you're not talking about huge numbers of entrepreneurs who have done a rewards-based crowdfunding campaign. But I do think rewards is a great stepping stone into doing any form of investment crowdfunding.
Yeah, I did an informal article. I am totally not the scholar here, but I was just looking around online. It looks like in 2016, about a year since the Jobs Act was put into effect, about 36 million has been funded through Regulation CF. So do you think we're going to be seeing more and more entrepreneurs that are using equity crowdfunding to raise fund? What actually has to happen for that to occur?
So I think part of it is an awareness issue. So it was one of the reasons I was so delighted that we NYC did a day on financing and a panel on crowdfunding. So you were on it, Indiegogo was on it, and Kiva was on it. And the more awareness that could be generated about these new forms of crowdfunding, the more entrepreneurs will know about it. And then less about rewards and more about investment. There's resistance among, in particular, lawyers which is what my research showed, is that lawyers, it's a new form of crowdfunding. Lawyers are, you hire a lawyer to advise you on making sure that you're not taking risk. And lawyers tend to be very risk adverse. So literally a lot of women I spoke to advised them not to do investment crowdfunding. So I think that all of the bar associations could really help out and educate on lawyers, and the same goes for accountants, that this is safe. I mean, all ways of raising money have risk, but if you go into it with your eyes wide open and you're educated, there are real advantages to doing an equity or an investment crowdfunding raise. So
totally,
on average, it'll take you about half the amount of time to raise on an accredited crowdfunding platform than if you were in the offline world.
Yeah, and that's a really significant burden that shouldn't be understated. If you're raising money from a VC, you're raising money from a bunch of angels, that's going to take significant time away from your company. So to have that time cut in half with something like an equity crowdfunding platform, that's going to allow you to then focus back on what your business is actually doing. So I think that we're going to see a lot of growth there. And like you said, there's also the legal requirement. So if you're getting started with an equity raise, number one, I think I've taken away from this interview, you have to be aware of the platforms that are out there that you can actually go on, the ones that, what they're good at funding, the types of companies. Number two, being aware of the legal requirements and exploring that a bit, working with a legal team that's familiar with crowdfunding. And then number three is also being aware that this is still a marketing game. You got to go out there and you got to convey your value when it comes to the company and putting together a pitch. Are there any other things you want to pass on to the listeners in terms of what they need to do with this campaign?
Yeah, so I love that, you talked about sort of develop your why and make sure your messages are on target. You're going to really need to build out your network, which you would have to do if you were raising money in the offline world. So you build your network so that you can meet investors in crowdfunding because you're online. Having that video is going to be very important. I found what was very important in terms of a rewards-based campaign, and possibly maybe equally as important in any crowdfunding, is an email list. So, even though I have a big social media presence, really my conversions came through email. So understanding, experimenting and understanding which tactics work best for your particular network. So I've interviewed enough entrepreneurs who have raised money through whether it's rewards or investment crowdfunding to know that no one size fits all and that you really need to experiment.
This is all really great information. Where can people go to learn a little bit more about the research you've conducted, also some of your articles, all that kind of stuff? Where can people go?
So you can go to venture.com, so VENTURENEER.com. In a couple of weeks, we'll be relaunching the site. So I would normally tell you to also take a look at the sitemap and click on, I have a category called crowd financing. I don't know what it's going to look like on the new site. So I'll certainly have that category, but we haven't quite figured out where it will be. And then if you go into the research section, right now it's its own tab, the crowdfunding site research, but in the future it'll be under research. Awesome.
There's also, you write a really great column on Forbes, being a Forbes contributor. There's some really good articles to dive in there, both about entrepreneurship, also entrepreneurship if you're a female in the audience. So I really recommend checking out that as well. I took away a lot from this interview, particularly the emphasis that needs to be put on some of the other mediums like Kiva. And the way that you can start with some of these other, as you called it, crowdfunding light, which is great. Yeah. I love that. Crowdfunding light. which is like
Yeah.
Kiva, trying out maybe even rewards-based, and also equity crowdfunding for those in the audience that are serious about raising significant sums with crowdfunding. I think that is the future, quite honestly. And I think that some of the stuff you shared here today will help people get started on the right track.
Absolutely. And I think what's interesting also about women is that they are very open to doing things that others haven't done. So even I interviewed a woman named Anita Jardine, and her company, Oniva, connects people to healthcare workers. So, you need an elder care worker or a child care worker because you're going on a trip, or you're out sick and you need somebody to help cover with your elder care needs or your child care needs. And she's raised over $1 million in equity financing, but then had a need for money, and Kiva really was the answer for her.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. My final question to you, Geri, is if you were to speak directly to a woman entrepreneur in the audience, and she's right now in the midst of building her company, she's looking into crowdfunding, could you share with her either a word of encouragement, maybe a final tip, something you'd like to pass on to her, something you wish you knew maybe earlier in your career, anything like that? Would love it if you could end on this note.
So it's hard work, and persistence pays off. So I highly encourage women to experiment and look at these new financing options. Women really excel at doing them.
Awesome. Thanks for coming on the show. We'll have to have you back.
Thank you, Sal. Take care.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Crowdfunding Demystified podcast. Again, my name is Salvador Briggman. Thank you for joining me here today. We learned a lot about equity crowdfunding. We learned about Kiva, which is a really cool resource and website that you can use to raise upwards of $10,000 in an interest-free loan. And finally, we learned about some of the struggles that females and women entrepreneurs go through when trying to raise capital. I think this is a struggle that is currently ongoing. And I'm guilty of having gotten tweets and emails from females in my audience who have said, "Hey, Sal, why don't you have more women entrepreneurs on the podcast? Like, why don't you have more girl bosses on the show?" So I recognize that, and I'm here to support you in your journey. That's one of the reasons why I wanted to have Geri on this show, because she can deliver information much better than I can to this demographic. And I want you also to feel armed with a war chest of strategies going into your crowdfunding campaign. I want you to feel confident about going out there, asking for sums of money and knowing exactly what people are getting out of it. No one just gives money out of the goodness of their heart. There's always a presentation. There's always marketing and persuasion. And I hope that with this podcast, you're gaining a little bit more knowledge as to how to do that, how to convey yourself, how to present your project in an effective way, and also the marketing strategies that are proven to work for your business and also for crowdfunding. If you want to check out that free guide on equity crowdfunding, you can go to crowdcrux.com/equity crowdfunding. That is crowdcrux.com/equity crowdfunding. And that will get you up to date with some of the terminology. It will introduce you to some of the major websites out there and really serve as a primer if you are interested in exploring the world of equity crowdfunding. Again, my name is Sal. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I will see you next time.